Great. Very excited to be here today and welcome everyone to the webinar on the 2026 Pharmaceutical Innovation and Invention Index. It's the longest running benchmark study on pharmaceutical innovation in the industry, now in its 15th year. So we look forward to also sharing specific insights from how trends have evolved and what's changed in the industry. By introduction, we're part of SAI, a company that combines complementary capabilities in strategy, market research, competitor intelligence, and benchmarking. And at IDEA Pharma, we particularly focused on path to market strategy and positioning. And we use the Pharmaceutical Innovation Index also to analyze, you could say, best practices and case studies, what drives success in terms of successful drug development and commercialization. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Athena, who is our methodology and data expert and will be sharing some unique insights with you. I'm Jacqui Poot. I lead the Strategic Consulting and Analytics business unit, and I will be also translating the data into specific insights. And at the end of the session, we also have a Q&A. So we do definitely encourage everyone to use the chat so we can start to gather questions and also get back to you after our presentation. So in terms of the Pharmaceutical Innovation and Invention Index, we've created a visual that shows how much the rankings have changed over 15 years. So let me share that with last 10 years. So let me share that with you now. Coming in, dropping off, and obviously moving into the top 10, back out again. And more interesting question is obviously what's happening. That's also what we will be. So with that overview, and now we'll start our deep dive. But first, we want to make sure we level set on what we're actually measuring, because invention and innovation are not the same. So invention means the creation of something that did not exist before, and innovation means if you've been able to successfully convert that invention into value. For our Pharmaceutical Innovation and Invention Index, we really make a clear distinction there with different metrics. And we rank companies using a range of clinical, regulatory, and commercial metrics, looking from a corporate perspective, but also all the way to individual product decisions and outcomes. So the Invention Index measures a company's potential value based on its pipeline. And then the Innovation Index measures a company's ability to convert that potential value into realized value. Last year, we, for the first time, also launched the China-specific Innovation and Invention Index, which is still available on our website. And also we have an annual Digital Innovation Index, which looks how top-performing companies apply various different digital solutions across R&D, clinical development, and commercial. So with 15 years of insights, we actually thought, well, let's look back at what the industry looked like 15 years ago and how it has changed. And that already starts to explain, you could say, some of the changes that we've seen in the rankings that you saw on the chart at the start. So some of the biggest financial swings came actually from blockbuster replacement, and performance amongst companies diverged based on how well these companies were in replacing aging mega blockbuster products. Then also the rise of innovation of biotech has led to deals and also partnerships, which became more central to growth as well as R&D productivity. And over the past 15 years, obviously, we all know that oncology really emerged as a therapy area and has also sustained. And now also the metabolic diseases are one of pharma's major growth engines in terms of therapy area. But obviously we can expect more shifts to happen and also different types of pipeline strategies because patent cliffs will further disrupt the status quo. So ultimately what we're trying to answer with the Pharmaceutical Innovation and Invention Index is, what if you gave the same molecule to two different companies in early phase? would they be equally successful? And the more interesting question also, why? When you look at this chart, and I assume that many people here have also downloaded our report and are familiar with this year's rankings, you can see that there's really a big spread between the different companies. And these are the top 30 companies based on annual revenue, with clearly outperformance in the top right corner. So we will be diving into what's driving really the rankings, the increases, but also sometimes where companies are less successful. And this year, for the first time, we had one company ranking #1, both on the innovation and the invention index. It might not have come as a surprise for many. And when you look at the chart here, you can see that Lilly has been improving its performance already for many years. They rose from the middle of the pack, being ranked number 17th in 2014, to really a top-tier innovator. They've been improving across R&D productivity. They have an average R&D spend of 4.5 billion compared to what we see overall in the industry of 8 billion per approval. They have 21% reinvestment in their pipeline, which signals a strong belief in terms of the assets that they put forward. And they've had last year also strong phase 2 and phase 3 data readouts, also combined with regulatory success with oncology, with the FDA, but also within Alzheimer's disease in Europe. And in terms of the products they bring to market, they have commercial impact in the first 3 to 5 years. Last year, we saw a 45% revenue growth, which is massive and unparalleled with what we saw in the other companies. And more than half of that revenue growth came from Mounjaro and Zepbound. And they continue to deliver also on their cardiometabolic franchise with superior data versus Novo's Wegovy, but also additional cardiovascular and pediatric type 2 diabetes outcomes. And if we look beyond, you could say, the current portfolio, they also invest in partnerships. Verve Therapeutics, Site1 acquisitions help to expand also their pipeline. And what we kind of conclude with Lilly is that they combine commercial strength with pipeline depth. So we look forward to seeing their performance further over the years to come. And then moving on from the #1, we would like to discuss some highlights from the top 10 companies, starting on the left with innovation. So when looking back in our index, Sanofi initially declined after loss of exclusivity on some legacy products like Lantus, for instance, also alongside weaker pipeline activity. But Dupixent has helped rebuild momentum after lagging their peers for several years. And now they've climbed 19 places into the top 3. And when we look at what drives Sanofi, they really transformed themselves into a launch and readout-driven R&D powerhouse. They grew 25% in sales, but then also they have several first-in-class or best-in-class assets in oncology, rare diseases, as well as immunology. It's not a story without setbacks, though, as we've seen with tolebrutinib, for instance, but they've shown resilience and they are focused also on targeted acquisition. So they continue to expand their pipeline. And what is notable with Sanofi is that they actually have a more efficient R&D spend per approval. It's trending towards 3 billion, so even more efficient than Lilly. The next one, in terms of GSK, also a new entry in the top 10, climbing 10 places. Is also representing their strongest ranking in years. Is basically around that their strategic pivot from years ago is really delivering. Last year, they had double-digit financial growth. They've also sustained regulatory momentum with a first-in-class antibiotic approval, and oncology has re-emerged as a growth engine. Also, their R&D spend is efficient and in the same range as Sanofi. And what we see with GSK is that they have a strong, renewed pipeline, but also are able then to translate that in commercial growth in oncology, respiratory, infections, disease, and vaccines, where they have a very strong footprint, of course. If we then move to the right-hand side, a new entry in the top 10 is Novartis, climbing 12 places, and it's the strongest improvement we've seen in the invention index amongst large pharma this year. And they've had exceptional pipeline execution and depth across, and this makes me smile, across so many therapy areas that are meaningful: cardiovascular, renal, metabolic diseases, immunology, oncology, and neuroscience, with more than 60 active clinical trials. So their scientific productivity is supported by sustained investment and also regulatory success across all of these therapy areas. So what we see with Novartis being in the top 10 on invention, but not yet on innovation, is that they are laying the foundation really for future success and innovation-led growth. So it will be exciting also to see how that develops. Then highlighting actually a company that's, you could say, stalling and has actually dropped off the top 10 of innovation is Pfizer. And what we see here is a company that is having a more difficult path in terms of navigating the post-COVID era. So the extraordinary boost they've had from their vaccine and antiviral has faded, alongside more intense competitive pressure in other therapy areas. They're also facing patent expiry. So in terms of their R&D engine, and their listing here, their R&D engine remains large, but they also have seen setbacks, for instance, with late phase discontinuations. So they are actively looking at reshaping, reprioritizing their portfolio. And hopefully some of the major deals they've done, for instance, with Sagan, can also re-establish some of that momentum. So what we see here is an example of a company with, you could say, high pipeline potential, but it has yet to convert into commercial success. So after, you could say, also looking at companies that might be dropping off the top 10 or stalling, is actually, we have a new entrant with Genmab. And Genmab represents a new type of biopharma company. They combine really deep scientific specialization with global commercial impact. And while they're smaller scale than some of the large players, they can really compete at a strong level. They're a leader in advanced antibody technologies, and their proprietary platforms have generated assets with strong clinical profiles. And what we can see in terms of their pipeline is that they have a high quality late stage pipeline, but also focused on high value indications. Now I'll be handing over to Athena, who will be expanding some more on the data that we've gathered across the different top performing companies.
Thank you, Jacqui. This is just some of the data that we have been gathering as part of our index, and we have created here a calculation of R&D productivity for each of the 30 companies that we include in our index this year. So for the blue bars, you can see our calculation of how much R&D money does each company need to spend to gain one approval based on what we have seen in the past 5 years. So we average 5-year R&D spend, and we extrapolate to the amount of indications that have been approved for each of these companies. And the red line shows you the industry average. So a company that falls below that red line, that would mean that they are, in a sense, more cost efficient than the industry average, while a company whose blue bar is above means that it's less cost efficient than the industry average. And we can highlight some different examples and different kind of patterns that we can see here in terms of cost efficiency. For example, we see that Hengrui has quite a low R&D spend per approval. So this efficiency comes from a very high volume of pipeline assets compared to a low cost of development, because they tend to focus on validated mechanism, more like low risk assets, which leads to a very high kind of turnaround of approvals. We also have the example of Regeneron, which again focuses on fewer programs that are a bit lower in terms of risk, and that allows them to maximize their output per asset. And then on the other hand, we have companies like BioNTech, for example, that appear to have a higher R&D productivity cost than the average of the industry. This is because they have a lot of heavy upfront investment in platforms that are still maturing. So they haven't yet reached that approval stage, but it is very possible that in a few years, when those approvals mature, we see their R&D cost effectiveness improve by a lot. And then, Jacqui, would you like to speak a bit about the strategic insights that we can derive from these metrics?
I think it might be good to first kind of continue with the freshness overview as well. Yeah.
Okay, this is another one of our metrics that we use to kind of evaluate the companies that we include in our index. We calculate two different metrics, one that we call freshness. And by freshness, we mean the proportion of revenue that a company has within a given year that comes from fresh products. So products that have been approved within the last 5 years. And this is represented by the red part of the bar that you see in this graph for each company. And then we compare this with the fragility of each company, that is the revenue that comes from drugs that are nearing their patent expiration date. So the drugs that are going to expire, whose patent is going to expire within the next 5 years. So again, you can see different examples of freshness and fragility within the 30 companies. Just to highlight a few representative examples, you can see Merck and Johnson & Johnson, both of whom have very high revenue overall. But we also see that a big part of the revenue is made up of that gray bar representing more fragile assets, assets that are nearing their patent expiration. And the lower proportion of that total revenue is made up of fresh assets. We also see the opposite pattern in a few companies like Novo Nordisk, for example, or Eli Lilly might be the most characteristic example of a company that has a very high proportion of fresh revenue, which means that there is a lower long-term kind of risk that a big part of revenue is lost to patent expiration. These are just different strategic approaches that the companies follow. And again, companies can change their freshness and fragility balance very rapidly just by gaining a few approvals within a year with a high return on investment. And to further showcase this, we have also created this graph, which is an overall trend of the average spend per R&D approval over the last 6 years. And we can see that there is an overall almost doubling of the average amount of money that a company needs to spend in R&D to get one approval. The dark blue and the light blue parts of the graph represent the total amount of assets approved by the FDA, novel approvals and also BLA approvals in a given year. But you can see that overall there is a positive trend on the R&D investment getting higher and higher every year almost per approval. So, Jacqui, would you like to speak a bit about what we can glean from this pattern?
Yeah, thank you, Athena. And I think the doubling of, you could say, this R&D spend, what we see here is really also a system under pressure, but not necessarily driven because we are doing things in the wrong way as an industry, but also because we've shifted to more complex treatment modalities. There are also higher evidence standards that we need to adhere to. And there's also more competition within the therapy areas in terms of driving for differentiation and finding novel approaches. And all of these things also push the costs up, as well as what's also in these calculations, obviously, is large-scale mergers and acquisitions. And I think it also reflects that we are in a transition phase, actually, because obviously there's a lot of talk in terms of artificial intelligence, improving R&D productivity. But most of that impact is still upstream, and it has not resulted yet in a sweep of late stage or approvals of new drugs coming to market. And the other factor is China, which is also improving the speed of drug development, cost efficiency, and also clinical execution. But also here it's emerging, and what we don't see yet is that that has translated in global launches, which is what this chart obviously also looks at. So that is in terms of those benefits that they will be realized, but probably it will not be visible until, like, say, the next 3 to 5 years. I think speaking of AI and China, what our index does show is that top performing companies really have specific approaches to these developments, and it really tells a story also that they operate differently, and this is what is interesting and where we can learn from, obviously. Going back to Lilly, here at IDEA, where we also focus on, what drives good decision making in terms of which molecules to take forward and launch in the market and how to launch them. We really love this quote from Dan. We're not in the business of hope, we're in the business of evidence. And what Lilly has done already a long time ago, and as you've seen, they have been continuously improving their performance, is they've implemented a very objective decision-making framework and also an approach to balance risk and reward across their portfolio in terms of where they invest. And putting that in place has really made a big difference to, you could say, the success of the late stage, the mid and the late stage clinical trial outcomes at Lilly. And we also know they accelerate, you could say, the projects that are really, you could say, winners, potentially winners in the markets, and they deprioritize in terms of investment projects that are not good enough. And that's sometimes what we see also as an issue industry is in terms of benchmarking is against what bar are we measuring and what does that mean for the decision making and what we want to take forward in development. Then we already mentioned also artificial intelligence, and so it's not just about, you could say, also the assets in the pipeline, but also how it's being taken forward. And what we see here are different use cases where we've seen pharma companies, and especially the top performing companies, going from pilots to really integrated approaches where they apply artificial intelligence. The two most common ones that is also reported, because all of the information we have is also from the public domain, is in drug discovery and design, as well as in clinical development and trial operations. And this is where we can really see value being realized, also with, improving speed, as we've already mentioned, but also efficiency and probability of success for assets making it to market and becoming successful. On the other side, Sanofi was also in our top 3 of the Digital Innovation Index because they've invested heavily in terms of optimizing manufacturing workflows with the use of AI. And we see this is kind of more of an emerging field where we'll probably see more in the years to come. And then building on how AI is reshaping innovation, also the attention, as I already alluded to, is shifting to where innovation is coming from. So when we look at how the top performing companies are deploying different kinds of initiatives in China, there are basically, you could say, 2 takeaways from this overview and the data that we've gathered. And that is that China is playing a dual role on one side as a strategic local hub for R&D, manufacturing and commercialization. And on the other side, also as sources for external innovation through licensing. Obviously, we see new deals and bigger deals every week. And that's also remarkable indeed that the deal value is growing in terms of what is possible with the innovation coming out of China. And also in October, we will be launching our 2026 China Innovation and Invention Index. And then this year, also following the example from our Chinese colleagues, we have introduced a category called Global Disruptive Pioneers. So these are companies that are not generally generating revenue. So they are, too early stage to be included in the top 30, but they are working on scientific breakthroughs with also the potential to have strong commercial impact. And we're very pleased to represent here those 10 companies across different therapy areas. I think just coming out of obviously ASCO, Revolution Medicines, a late-stage clinical oncology company that probably everyone's heard of, has really been making global headlines for their unprecedented phase 3 data in pancreatic cancer, and also is now one of the highest valued companies in terms of biotech. So this is one of the examples. Athena, can you also share one of the examples for the audience that you're interested in?
Of course, we also shortlisted Compass Pathways back in the beginning of April when we were creating the Global Disruptive Pioneers shortlist. And just a few weeks later, the news about the company getting the National Priority Voucher came out. So we really felt like this validated our shortlisting choices in a way. That just brings the company a lot closer to their first approval. So in a sense, both this example and the Revolution Medicines example kind of really put credence to our shortlisting. And we hope that for the rest of the companies as well, we will soon see similar news and similar good developments.
Great, thank you. And with that, we're at the end in terms of the insights we wanted to share with you. We obviously have a lot more we could talk about, so we're opening the floor for questions in the remaining time, and otherwise we can also follow up offline if you need to drop. Theo, are there any specific questions? Otherwise, I see a hand raised.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat, Jacqui. I don't know if you can see them. One was just around the parameters that contribute to invention versus innovation. I wonder if we could expand on that to start with.
I could answer that briefly. We have more details in the white paper about exactly how we calculate each metric, but generally, the metrics that we include in our innovation index have more to do with return on investment, and they take into account the financial performance of the products that a company has already launched. So we look at the different financial parameters like net revenue or like overall revenue, R&D costs. We also look at freshness, like we described before, in contrast to fragility. Well, for the invention index, we don't look at any assets that have been launched. We only look at the pipeline of a company. So our metrics there are more focused on regulatory designations, clinical trials that a company has, how many different treatment areas they're operating in, how successful they are in kind of moving their assets from phase 1 to phase 2 and then to phase 3. So the key difference is that innovation focuses on launched products and return on investment, while invention focuses on pipeline assets.
Great, thank you. Theo, or was there still someone with their hand raised? Feel free to unmute.
The hand has gone down, but there are some more questions in the chat. One around M&A costs and whether they're included in our calculations of R&D spend. The question continues to check whether there's any bias around companies that use more inorganic growth.
So do you want to answer? We get that often, right? Yes. Yeah.
We do include M&A costs in cases where drugs have been acquired. But of course, we also do acknowledge that it's different to acquire. The cost of acquiring a drug that is already in late phase development will be different than if a company were to start from drug discovery and move through all of the clinical trial phases with the same drug. So we do include it in our calculations, but if we see a company having a lot of acquisitions, a lot of external assets that they acquire very near launch, we do call that out in our white paper as something, a different operational model for how companies choose to reach launch.
Thank you, Athena. We've had another comment, I guess, around the extent to which Korea is a hub for innovation and could be considered in a future Asia Innovation Index, I think.
Yeah, great points, actually. Yes, we will take a note of that. Yeah.
Another one, what trends have we seen on financial return on R&D investment? Have we seen any early impact from AI on return on R&D investment yet?
So for that, I would say we have done a longitudinal study on what we can see by kind of projecting the data we have been gathering over the years, and kind of helping estimate potentially the performance of these companies in future iterations of the index. We can share this paper with the participants of the webinar because it is free to read and I think it's quite comprehensive. Something that we have found that is quite interesting is that there is, in a way, kind of a golden mean of R&D cost, where if you go higher than that, return on investment kind of starts diminishing. If you go lower than that, it does kind of make the likelihood that a product reaches approval lower. So there is kind of an optimal R&D cost that companies tend to gather around. We have also seen, and what we used in our assessment was basically we tried to project approvals 5 years down the line based on R&D spend this year and the past few years, just to give a time lag for those R&D costs to actually mature into clinical trials. And we did find a very good kind of predictability based on R&D spend today to how that translates into approvals a few years down the line.
Thank you, Athena. Yeah, loads more questions coming in, so we'll spend as much time as we have, I think.
Yeah, sure.
One here from Paul Sims. What's your assessment of Arum's law, and do you believe we are moving the curve on R&D productivity? Is AI making a difference yet?
So for that, again, I would point to the paper. One kind of issue is that when we did our longitudinal assessment, it was a bit hard to quantify the impact of AI in our regression analysis, because a lot of companies still were not super transparent about how they were using it or exactly how it contributed to their drug development process. But as we get more data that kind of allows us to look at the hard numbers behind how AI is used, I think we can really improve our model to include that AI modifier. And yes, personally, I believe we will see a lot more drug discovery kind of optimization coming from that.
I think just to add more on from a qualitative perspective, thinking of the Digital Innovation Index, where we also describe specific use cases of companies that apply AI and other digital technologies successfully. And one example that just comes to mind is, it's been a while back, but is, for instance, combining digital in terms of clinical development, in terms of patient outreach, and going into, you could say, difficult to reach patient communities. The technologies had an effect in terms of positive recruitment and then followed up by enrollment. So you could say then there's a richer patient population enrolled in the trial and also faster. And also these patients have already been better educated about what to expect from the trial as well. So that's one example. We've also seen examples where, data analysis can be expedited, which also then helps with, shortening the timelines in terms of governance review, decision-making, and follow-on studies. But definitely it's something that we will continue to update and include.
Thank you. And probably our last question then, is to what extent does the innovation index correlate with the to what extent does the invention index correlate with the innovation index based on the past analyses?
So in very general terms, a pattern that we have noticed is that companies who are doing really well on the invention index don't necessarily do well on the innovation index on the same year. So a company might rank very high on the invention index in 2025, but kind of in the middle of the ranking in the innovation index. However, the invention index does predict good future performance a few years down the line in the innovation index. So it doesn't translate to good performance necessarily in the same year, but it is likely to translate to good performance in innovation a few years down the line when those pipeline assets have had the time to mature and launch successfully.
Yeah, I do think, Athena, just to add there is that it's obviously it really depends on a company's capabilities and how they operate. And what we've seen with top performing companies also is obviously they need to navigate a much more complete political path to patients, but also have agility in terms of execution. And that's one thing that we see is that, there's not necessarily a science problem, but quite often there will be execution problems. And companies that also then do well have a more diversified approach, also in terms of life cycle management. Platform approaches still perform well, also what we see, versus you could say a single asset if you look at the smaller companies. And then also partnerships, academic partnerships, strategic partnerships help to improve companies' performance in terms of innovation. Were there any more questions, Theo?
If we have time, there is another question that has come in, and this might tee up the China Innovation Index quite well. So the question is, do you think the West will increasingly rely on the East for innovation and technological breakthroughs rather than generating them internally, or will innovation and invention continue to be led primarily by the West?
Well, I think what we're seeing already is that if we talk about East and West, is that East is really emerging as a global inventor and innovator. Just if we look at statistics in terms of patents, but also number of clinical trials, China is outperforming the US in terms of doubling those numbers. So we can expect a much bigger wave of products also coming. And I think what we will see is that also the Chinese biotech companies would want to establish global commercial infrastructures. At the moment, obviously, also a lot through partnerships, but also with companies like B1, which also has a ranking in the global index, with building hubs in the West, so to speak. So they have their own in-house end-to-end capabilities as well.
Great, thank you both. I think that's all of our questions.
Great. And then also a big thank you for our audience for listening and asking these great questions. Feel free to get in touch. Happy to exchange more insights and Athena as well over virtual coffee or in person. So thank you all.